present tense verb conjugation. This video will review some basic terminology and concepts needed to conjugate verbs in the present tense in Spanish. If you're feeling confused about what any of these terms mean, this video is for you. Please feel free to reference this video if you need to refresh on basic grammatical terms or how to conjugate. Subject pronouns, pronombres de sujeto. Remember that subject pronouns are pronouns that can be used as the subject of a sentence. Don't be discouraged by these grammatical terms. These are things you already know. Now you just have a name for it. Subject pronouns can be singular or plural. If there is one person or thing doing the action of a sentence, we would use a singular subject pronoun. If there is more than one person or thing completing the action, we would use a plural subject pronoun. Remember that we have first, second, and third person. First person will include I. In the singular, it is just I. In the plural, it is we. When you think about it, we is the plural form of I because when you put yourself in a group, you use this pronoun to describe that group. I plus another person is we. The second person is you. In English, we have one word for you, and sometimes y'all or all y'all. We no longer have a formal you or an exclusive plural you. Some speakers of English use y'all or all y'all for a plural form of you. In this chart, the singular you in the second person is marked as informal because in Spanish there is an informal you that we will talk about in a moment. When we are exclusively talking about English, there is not a modern informal you. The third person is he, she, it, or in the plural, they. Now let's look at Spanish. In the singular, primera persona, singular, first person singular, you have yo. Yo is the way to say I in Spanish. In the plural first person, you have nosotros o nosotras. These are the way to say we in Spanish. Nosotros can be used for a group of males or a group of males and females together. Nosotras is only used when a person is saying we and talking about a group of females. If you are male identifying, you will not use nosotras to talk about yourself. This also includes a large group of women with one. You could have a group of 100 women and one male, and you will use nosotros. As soon as there is one male in the group, Spanish will default to the masculine. You can kind of look at the masculine grammatically as masculine or neutral in the plural. The second person, la segunda persona, singular, es tú. And this is the informal you that we mentioned earlier. The plural informal you is vosotros o vosotras. This subject pronoun is only used in Spain. Like nosotros and nosotras, vosotros and vosotras has a masculine and feminine form. The masculine form can be used with males or a mixed group. The feminine form can only be used when talking to a female identifying group. Third person singular, tercera persona singular. El is the word in Spanish for he. Be careful not to say ello. This is not the word for he in English. Sometimes people get confused and want to put another L and an O here. Do not do that. There is él for he and ella for she. Usted is the formal you. Usted can be used when talking to a boss or your teacher or anyone with whom you wish to be more respectful. The third person plurals, las tercera persona plurales, son ellos, they when referring to a male identifying group or a mixed group, ellas when referring to a female identifying group, they, and ustedes. In Spain, ustedes is the formal way of saying you to a group of people. Perhaps if you were giving a presentation, you would use ustedes to be more respectful to your crowd. Outside of Spain, ustedes is the only word that exists for you all. It is both formal and terms. You will hear the following terms often in many language classes. These grammatical terms typically aren't part of your everyday language, but they are important in describing and talking about what we are learning in class. Let's start with subject. A subject is the person or thing doing the action. The verb is the action of the sentence. An infinitive is the basic form of a verb. In English, when we have infinitives, we use the word to before them. For example, to learn. In Spanish, an infinitive will end in AR, ER, or IR. Por ejemplo, aprender. Aprender is an ER verb. The infinitive is aprender. The stem or the root. The stem or the root is the part of the verb that is left when the ending is taken off. Por ejemplo, aprend. Aprend is the root or the stem of the verb aprender. When the ER is taken off of aprender, aprend is left. This is the stem or the root. Conjugate. Conjugating is putting endings that match the subject on the stem. So remember, the subject is the person doing the action. In Spanish, there are many different conjugations for each person. So the verb ending must match this person. For example, aprender conjugated is aprendo in the yo form, aprendes in the tu form, aprende in the él, ella, and usted form, aprendemos in the nosotros form, aprendéis in the vosotros o vosotras form, and aprenden in the ellos, ellas, y ustedes form. Conjugating in English. We conjugate in English, but English is not as inflected as Spanish, meaning there aren't as many meaningful conjugations. The verb to be is a good example because it has more inflection than most verbs in English currently have. Let's look at the verb to be. I am, you are, he is, she is, we are, and they are. It sounds weird to say I are, because we know that are does not go with the subject pronoun I. This should be I am in standard English. Please note there are other variations of English. They are valid, but currently we are discussing standard English. To talk. I talk, you talk, he talks, she talks, we talk, and they talk. It doesn't make sense to say we talks because the S ending does not go with the subject pronoun we. The S ending can only go with he and she. Now let's look at Spanish conjugation. Let's look at the verb to be again. Yo soy, tú eres, él, ella, usted es, nosotros y nosotras somos, vosotros y vosotras sois, ellos, ellas y ustedes son. Let's look at the same example. It doesn't make sense to say yo eres because eres goes with the to form. So this doesn't agree. You have two different subjects. You have I, but then it's in the you form. It should be yo soy, I am, not I are. Let's look at the verb hablar, to talk. Yo hablo, tú hablas, él, ella, usted habla, nosotros y nosotras hablamos, vosotros y vosotras habláis, ellos, ellas y ustedes hablan. Again, nosotros hablas does not work. Nosotros hablas would be we, you talk. That's confusing, and it's unclear who is talking when the subject pronoun does not match the verb ending. It should be nosotros hablamos. Now let's look at AR, ER, and IR verbs. We will begin with AR verbs. Remember that the AR verb endings are o, as, a, amos, ais, and an. Let's continue with using hablar, or to talk, as our example. In order to conjugate the verb hablar, the first step is to take off the ending. Now you have the stem. The stem of hablar is habl. Since we know the stem is habl, we will use this for every single conjugation. This stem or root is the base of our verb with this. Now let's do the yo form. Look at your chart. The present tense yo form ending is o. I talk in the present tense is hablo. Let's look at the to form. Tú hablas. Let's look at the él, ella, and usted form. Él, ella, or usted habla. Nosotros, nosotras, hablamos. Vosotros y vosotras, habláis. Ellos, ellas, y ustedes, hablan. Now, let's look at some ER verbs. Comer is an ER verb because it ends in ER. Comer means to eat. The first step to conjugating the verb comer is to take off the ER. Now you have your stem or your root. The stem or the root of comer is com. Now we know we can apply com to all of these forms. This is the eat part. Now we have to make the verb reflect each person. Let's conjugate. The present tense ending for the yo form for ER verbs is o. So I eat is como. You eat is comes. He, she, or you formal eats, él, ella, usted, come. Now let's go to the plural side. Nosotros y nosotras ends in hemos. Comemos. Vosotros y vosotras ends in eis. Coméis. Ellos, ellas y ustedes ends in en. Comen. IR verb endings. We will use the verb vivir as our example for an IR verb. Vivir means to live. The first step is to take off the IR. The stem or the root of vivir is viv. We can apply this to all forms of vivir to begin our conjugations. The present tense IR is o. So I live is vivo. You in the informal, tú is vives. The él, ella, usted, or the he, she, or you formal conjugation is vive. Please notice that the yo, tú, él, ella, and usted forms are the same for ER and IR verbs in the present tense. Now let's begin our plural side. Please notice that nosotros and vosotros are different. This is where ER and IR verbs change from one another. For ER verbs, the nosotros ending is hemos. For IR verbs, it is imos. For ER verbs, the vosotros ending is eis. For IR verbs, it is is. Then, both verbs are the same again for the ellos, ellas, and ustedes conjugation. En. Let's say we live in Spanish. Vivimos. Let's say you all or y'all live in Spain. Vosotros vivís. Now let's conjugate the ellos, ellas, and ustedes form of to live. Ellos viven. Let's practice. How do you say we talk in Spanish? This is where knowing your subject pronouns in Spanish becomes very important. If you do not know your subject pronouns in Spanish, this is something you should study immediately. It will be very confusing if you don't know who is who. The word for we in Spanish is nosotros or nosotras, so we talk is hablamos. How do you say they eat in Spanish? Remember, there are two words for they. Ellos or ellas. Ellos comen. How do you say you live in the informal? Tú. Let's do some more practice. Caminar means to walk. Caminar is an AR verb. The first step to conjugating caminar is to take off the AR ending. Now let's say I walk. I in Spanish is yo. What is the yo ending for AR verbs in the present tense? O. The stem is camin and the ending is o. I walk is yo camino. How do you say she walks? Remember that she in Spanish is ella. What is the ella ending for present tense AR verbs? A. And the stem is still camin. Ella camina. Leer is to read. Leer is an ER verb. The first step to conjugating the verb leer is to take off the ER. The stem or the root of leer is le. How do you say we read? We in Spanish is nosotros or nosotras. And the present tense ending for ER verbs is hemos. Stem or root is le. Le plus hemos is leemos. Y'all read. We will use the vosotros form here. The vosotros ending for ER verbs in the present tense is eis. Vosotros leéis. Escribir is to write. Escribir is an IR verb. The first step to conjugating a verb is to take off the ending, so we must take off the IR. The stem or the root is escribe. Let's conjugate he writes. He in Spanish is él. The present tense IR ending for él, ella, and usted is e. Él escribe. They write. Remember that in Spanish, they can be ellos or ellas. The ellos for IR verbs in Spanish is en. Ellos escriben. Limpiar is to clean. The first step to conjugating the verb limpiar is to take off the AR ending. The root or the stem of limpiar is limpi. At the end will sound more like a Y when put next to an A, so it sounds like ya, limpiar. How do you say you clean in Spanish, using tú as our subject pronoun for you? The tú form ending for AR verbs in the present tense is as, and our stem is limpi. So, tú limpias. Remember, it sounds like a Y when put next to an A. Limpias. What are the two words for they in Spanish? Ellos y ellas. So how do you say they clean? Ellos limpian. Correr means to run in Spanish. Correr is an ER verb. The first step to conjugating correr is to take off the ER. Cor. Cor is the stem or the root of the verb correr. Let's conjugate for you in the formal this time. You run. What is the formal singular you in Spanish? Usted. What is the ER verb ending in the present tense for the subject pronoun usted? E. Usted corre. She runs. What is the subject pronoun she in Spanish? Ella. What is the ending for ella in the present tense for ER verbs? E. Ella corre. Please notice that the conjugation for usted and ella is the same. Compartir is an IR verb that means to share. The first step to conjugating the verb compartir is to take off the IR. Compart is share. We share. What is the word for we in Spanish? Nosotros or nosotras. What is the IR ending for nosotros y nosotras in the present tense for IR verbs? Imos. So we have to use our stem or our root, compart, and add imos. Compartimos. How do you say share? I in Spanish is yo. The present tense IR verb ending is o. We must use our stem, compart, and o together to say I share. Yo comparto.